Welcome back to the Training Babble Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Schell, and today I'm joined by Simon Kessler of Simon Says Cycling. Simon, thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, Dave, for having me.
So today we are going to talk about the off-season, which for my athletes, a lot of times it's the dreaded off-season because nobody wants to take time off and lose the fitness that they've worked all year to build. And I've done this podcast multiple times, probably once a season, but I think it's always worth revisiting, and especially to get other coaches' ideas on how they handle the off-season and how it might look different for other people. But before we get into that, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into coaching?
Yeah, sure. So originally I'm from South Africa, and I started racing when I was 12 years old. On the track first, I was national champion on the track and also on the road as under 13, and raced all through my teenage years in South Africa. When I was 18, I moved to France. My dad is French, so I raced as a Frenchman in France with the dream of riding the Tour de France one day. I did quite well. I was a stagiaire on a pro team, but then I developed a iliac artery problem that stopped me for a few years. Had 2 operations and came back, and then ended up turning professional with a smaller team in South Africa that became the team of Douglas Ryder, Quebecer. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that team. They were in the Tour de France with Mark Cavendish, first African team. So in the early years, I was racing for that team. So I raced 6 years professionally with that team. We raced all around the world. We raced US Pro Champs. I was national champion of South Africa professional, as well as African time trial champion. And then when I started coaching already when I was 18, actually. My dad was a top coach, and he coached some of the riders who went to the Olympics in Barcelona on the track. And I started coaching when I was 18. I was coaching the under 15, 16-year-old kids. In fact, I gave Robert Hunter his first training plan. Robert Hunter won a stage in the Tour de France. And we were also teammates representing South Africa at the Commonwealth Games. But the funny thing is I gave him his first training plan when he was 16. This is a long time ago, 1991.
Wow.
So I was always interested in coaching, because of my dad. And then when I was professional with the team that became Quebecer, back then it was called Microsoft. It was sponsored by Microsoft, also IBM Lotus before that. I started coaching some of my teammates back then. One of them actually went on to get third at the World Championships in the under 23 time trial. And that was early 2000s. So I was already very much in my blood coaching. And then when I moved to the US, I met my wife at the airport in Johannesburg on a chance encounter. And then 3 months later, we decided to meet up in Paris. And next thing you know, I'm living in Tampa, Florida, a place I'd never heard of before. Not the best place for cycling, I must say. Very flat, and the traffic's, quite bad. But also a great cycling community. I made a lot of friends in Tampa, and we raised, our kids back then, early 2000s, 2 young kids. So I stopped racing and I started my coaching business. And so that was back in, full time. I started in 2005, 2006 is when I went full time with coaching. Okay. And I've been coaching ever since. I coached Daryl Impey back then when he was a young kid as well, 19-year-old. He also went on to, the Tour de France, wear the yellow jersey. So it's been a long career, coaching all levels of cyclists, not just high-level cyclists. And it's been in my blood for a very long time. So that's a little bit about my background.
Yeah, and that's fantastic. I just learned a lot about you. I mean, I knew a bit, but that's an interesting story. And that's part of the reason I want to talk to you about this and why I enjoy talking to you is that you do have a big experience like coaching top-level pros and coaching juniors, coaching people in between. And so you kind of have everybody from the entire spectrum. And so I guess let's just start. What do you when you talk to your athletes about this time of year? Do you call it the off season? Do you call it a transition season? How do you handle this time of year? For me, I always feel like October's one of the trickiest months because typically people have just come off a big season of racing. There's still good weather, but it's about to turn cold. So how do you handle this and what do you call it?
Yeah, it's very different for every athlete. Having lived in Florida a long time, there really is no off season. Right. In fact, the off season might be July, when it's like super hot.
Right.
And now things are actually ramping up. They have their state championships now at the end of October and a lot of good races in November, a lot of Grand Fondos and that kind of thing. So I still have quite a lot of Florida, athletes. I also have clients in Australia and the Southern Hemisphere and South Africa.
Right.
So for them, they just keep riding. Like people in Florida, they never stop riding. They just ride. And because the weather is always good. And actually now in the winter is the best time of year. But then you have other athletes who, like we live in Colorado, things are going to get cold. That's quite different. So there's more of an emphasis on an off season. And I think it looks quite different depending on the person. I coach Peter Vakoc, who's one of the best gravel racers in the world. He just raced the World Championships this past weekend. He's going to take now maybe 3-4 weeks off the bike,
Right.
because he's had a really brutal season. He used to race professionally with Quick Step for 7 years. They would take 3-4 weeks completely off the bike.
Right.
And when you've done so many big races and big hours, that break's really good for you. But then when I have an athlete who's, working, has a consistent life routine, then they don't really want to take time off. And they also don't have massive weeks where they completely fatigue. Their week looks a lot more consistent, right, throughout the year. So for them, it might be more of a change of focus, not necessarily stopping any kind of training.
Right.
For my junior athletes, for them, I like to emphasize taking some time off more for the mental side. I think at least, 10 days to 2 weeks, ideally, to not touch the bike. And it's not necessarily they need it physically, but I think it's always good to have a mental reset. It also helps you step back a bit on your year and create a bit of perspective and think about next year and create some goals. So I think it's very individual. For those who are a little bit more serious, we can go into that in a bit if you want, but I'll sit down with them and I'll go through some questionnaires and we'll make some goals and we'll do some analysis and, we'll talk about the next year, make some plans together.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think a big thing for me, so much of it is the mental component to it. And like you said, if you've got athletes that have done a big race or several big races over the course of the season, you can only be on so much, right? And you've gone to the pain cave so often and you've been doing these 10, 15, 20-hour weeks and your entire life has revolved around the bike. And so a lot of times after Unbound, I'll have athletes take a week off just to kind of back off and kind of tend to the stoke so that they can have a strong back half of the season too. I think one thing I learned early in my coaching was with Ironman athletes, they'd sign up for their race in a year out and want to start training right away. They want to be as fit as possible. And so they want to start training and they're just so hyper focused. And all of a sudden they get 3 months out from the race and they're burned out and they don't want to ride their bike and they're done with it. And so it's I always tell athletes, we want to get 2 to 3 weeks out. That's where you want to get to the point where you're okay, I just want to get this fucking thing over with at this point. But if that's happening 3 months out, that's less than ideal. And so, yeah, let's go back to the athletes with, let's say, amateur athletes with big goals that have been doing things like Unbound or big events like that. What might their off season look like for you?
Well, I must say I agree with you in that. I think it makes sense to have also many little off seasons throughout the year. I do think that that makes a lot of sense where you might have 5 days off every 3 months, for example.
Right.
If you're doing bigger weeks, I think that makes a lot more sense than having just one big chunk at the end of the year where you lose a bunch of fitness. For riders who are training for harder events, Unbound, things like that. The off season, if we're talking more winter, again, it's kind of hard to have one answer for everyone in this.
Yeah,
but
absolutely.
But a lot of it would depend on if they're going to prepare for Unbound, and we look back at say this year's Unbound, and maybe we identified that they had poor fatigue resistance in the last few hours. They're lacking endurance. So then we might already think about implementing training in the winter, ready to think about how do we increase, fatigue resistance potentially. There's some research that, torque training, strength training, things like that can help with that. So maybe we place more emphasis on that and we build that progressively, maybe more lower intensity base volume because they're lacking, maybe their VT1 is low in comparison to, the VO2 max. So yeah, it's very much dependent on the person, because I have athletes who are competing to win Unbound, and then those who are, 4 or 5 hours slower than the pros, So it really, it's very dependent on the person. One thing also, what you were saying, which I've seen actually quite a lot, there are some athletes who get super motivated in the winter, right? They get like so hyped up and they just want to train. The spring hero. I remember I had one client who was a very talented under 23 racer, and he just loved training, and he went to Girona and he trained like perfectly, like for 6 months, like spent the whole winter in Girona. He just, every session, he was like a robot, just perfect, which is actually a red flag, actually. But he was just perfect. And then, he gets to the first camp of the year with his team and first race, and he decides, this is not for me, Meanwhile, he was like winning big races, and 23, he could have turned professional. So for me, it's a bit of a red flag when they're too motivated in the off season, actually, because so many times I've seen athletes, they're getting to their A race and they're like 2, 3 or 4, 5 weeks out, and they're like, I'm not motivated anymore. I'm like,
right.
You know what I mean? And it's like, wait a minute. So I think as a coach, one of the things we have to do is really help and manage somebody's energy, like for a long period of time.
Yeah.
Which means sometimes we have to do less than they want to do, maybe in the off season.
And that's hard to communicate sometimes too, right? It's like, I have athletes that hire me, and it's like, they want to know, like, what's the plan? What's the plan from now till like next December, And it's like, it depends. It all depends on what happens next week and the week after that and like things like that. But it's like, I always say my job is stress management, right? Both on and off the bike. And it's about like finding like the ebb and flow and not burning somebody out. But it's like, it's like they hire you, they're super excited, and it's like they want all the super secret workouts and the really hard workouts. And it's like, yes, there's a plan, and we need to like dole it out over time so that we hit that fitness at the right time and not burned out super early.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, because I see that often. So I think that's one of the jobs of a coach, is to really to dose the year in a good way, and maybe add a bit more recovery in than they think they need. But yeah, it's like I said, it's different for everybody. For higher level athletes, I like to ask them things like, just their overall thoughts on the year, their season, what they've, when did they feel their best in the year? Like which part of the year, like what kind of training did they feel like really worked for them? Also things that I'll ask them is, where do they think they need to improve, next year? Then we'll talk about goals, like specific goals. Not everybody is racing, but those who are racing and are more serious, we'll talk about some specific goals. I might do like a gap analysis if they have like a very specific goal and they know they're not there yet to be competitive where they want to be. We might figure out, okay, what weight do you need to be? Watts per kilo, power, where are you lacking to achieve that goal? Because this year you fell short, for example, and then we'll figure that out together. Like maybe they need to drop 2 kilos because their watts per kilo, because the race they're trying to target is super hilly and they have the power, but they just don't quite have the watts per kilo. Or maybe, like I have one athlete in Italy who's very good. His fresh numbers are as good as any World Tour pro, but the problem is he only has it in him to do it 1 or 2 times, and then after 4 hours of racing, he just doesn't have that ability anymore. Right. So for him, it's like, okay, you don't need to actually improve your 1 minute power, your 2 minute power, your 5 minute power, but we need to be able to do that like after 4 hours of racing, and so that's also not obvious always, like what's going to get you there,
Right.
So it's a little bit of like educated guess based on experience plus looking at research to try to come up with a plan. But as you know, like any plan you put together in the off season, it's not going to look like that once you're in the year.
Well, and we'll come back to that because that's something I want to talk about too. But just going back to the kind of, I don't know if you do like a formal season review, but that's something I like to do with my athletes, and typically do that in October. So go back, look at the races, I hate the word compliance, but basically like, this is what was planned, this is what actually got accomplished. And I like looking for trends and areas for improvement. And a lot of times for me, it's like, it's not even on the bike necessarily or power numbers that need to be improved. It might be life things, just like finding a routine that's repeatable, taking better nutrition, better sleep, better recovery habits, things like that. And so just really looking at trends. And so like a couple of examples, one athlete is like showing up late to races. So showed up late to the start line. So would have to start at mid pack and then have to waste so much energy trying to get to the front over the course. And so it's like, okay, so like, how do we just show up 15 minutes early? How do we like improve your warm-up routine? You know, another athlete, it's the bike falling apart. And so with him, it's like, it's not your fitness limiting you, it's your chain dropping, it's getting flat, it's crashing. So how do we identify, or how do we address those things in the off season, right? And it's like, the exciting thing about that is it's like free speed, where fitness is hard to come by. But if you can just like not get a flat for the race, like that's huge, you know?
I know, like I agree. I mean, it's funny how sometimes it's the most basic things that are like holding people back, you know, like getting your bike like fixed and serviced, you know, a week out and making sure everything's working, you know, or like you said, like, you know, some people who are late to race, or they don't have the right nutrition, and you know, you might have gone over it with them many times, but they just go off plan or whatever it is. But a lot of times it's things that it can be fixed easily, but for whatever reason they're just, you know, not doing it. So I think that's good. Yeah, I do a review with a lot of my athletes, not everyone, those who are like not racing and are just training week in, week out with no real long-term goal. I might not do a whole, you know, season review with them, but those who are racing and more serious, I like to do what you do as well, like sit down and review the year together and come up with strategies. But yeah, that is a big part of it. It's the basics. And I think a lot of times if you get the basics right, which is really just, you know, eating well, sleeping well, recovering well, reducing stress, you know, that's like 95% of everything, right? And then,
that's going back to like, athletes hire us, they want the secret, right? They want the secret workouts, they want the secret things. And it's like what I've found, and I'm guessing you've found the same thing, you've been coaching longer than I have, is for me, if you think about that Seiler hierarchy of endurance training needs or something, and it's like the base level of it is just like frequency. How often are you riding, or how often are you working out? Then on top of that, it's like, okay, intensity. And then like as you get closer to the top, it gets more and more specific, right? But it's like, in my experience with every athlete, somebody's deficient in like one of those three areas, right? It's like either doing too much intensity, not riding enough, not being consistent enough. And it's like, so if we always need to focus like with that, like start with that, is like, okay, well, what's preventing you from being consistent? Some people it's injury. Some people it's getting sick. Some people it's work getting in the way. And so it's like, okay, so how do we, like, we're problem solvers and as coaches as well, is like, how do we help you establish that consistency? Because in my experience, consistency is probably like 90 to 95% of it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I agree. It is hard to sometimes change people though, because, you know, you find people who are just on it and they just get it done, and then others always have a reason why they can't get it done. And I think a lot of that is just like how you wired, how you brought up, the habits you've developed, right? I mean, I have juniors who are really bad at that, you know, and then right. And then I'll have a handful of juniors who are amazing, you know, they impress me, and they've already developed those habits. So I think, you know, that's something as a coach, we have to help people develop good habits, right? Because those good habits will then lead to the goals and the success, the personal success they're looking for. But it really is about the habits, the daily habits, and making those more consistent and more productive.
Well, I think too, as you talk about that, that's something I've seen where I don't want to use the word victim mindset, but there's like the difference between like a victim mindset and a growth mindset, where some people, life is happening to them, and for other people, life is happening for them. And so I find that like those things kind of play out in races as well, where, like you said, some people just get it done. They figure it out. Like stuff pops up and they find a way to get it done. And other people, things pop up and it's like, oh, well, now I can't ride my bike today because it's supposed to rain, or it's going to rain, or something like that. And it's like, that shit happens in races too. Mm-hmm. Like, and when you face adversity in a race, like, are you just going to throw up your hands and call it a day? Or are you going to, and so it's like you said, like identifying that and then helping to guide and try to build some of those, like a different mindset and the habits as well.
Yeah. I mean, I have some clients who I'm like I'm impressed by, like they're even better than a lot of like some pros, in terms of just being so disciplined mentally.
Yeah.
I mean, I have one client, he'll work until 7 and he'll go on the trainer for like, 2 hours, 2.5 hours. Like I wouldn't do that,
Yeah.
like 8 o'clock at night, you know what I mean? But like, and then I have other under 23, athletes who are trying to be pros, and they don't ride because their battery and their parameter like stopped working, so they cut the ride short.
The Garmin
or they didn't bring a spare, so they had to only rode an hour instead of 5 hours because they didn't have a spare because they flattered.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's yeah. So people are their own, often worst enemies sometimes, and I think we just have to shine the spotlight on that sometimes and say, hey, like you could do better here.
Right. Absolutely. I want to go back to something real quick before I forget. You, and this is kind of a side note here. You mentioned coaching athletes in Florida. You coach people in the Southern Hemisphere and stuff like that, where they can ride all the time. And just going back to the whole mental burnout thing, it's like, isn't that a risk with people like the guys in Florida? If you can ride your bike all the time and you never take time off, that's a recipe for burnout. So do you, like you said, some of the hotter months, maybe that becomes the off season there, or how do you manage that?
Yeah, in Florida, definitely in July, August, often I'll reduce like the overall volume and hours, because like anything over, 3 hours in the middle of summer there is brutal, and your body takes a lot of strain with the heat there.
Yeah.
So I'll definitely cut down the hours, and I'll notice like quite a big drop off in power, like for a lot of people. And people who are so focused on their power going up constantly, they get freaked out, because they're like, I'm nowhere near my best. I'm getting worse, but
right.
It's because you're riding in like crazy heat and humidity. That's why. But so that's a bit of a challenge for people, just to like explain that to them. I think the thing is with Florida, because it's not, the roads are quite limiting. So most people are not doing a lot of volume, because it's kind of like you have to ride like through neighborhoods all day, or some crazy routes or bike paths. And so because they only do, I would say, less hours than when you live in like a place like we do, where it's just amazing to ride, then that's one part that helps in reducing the burnout, because people are doing maybe 8 to 10 hours a week compared to higher in places where riding is a lot nicer. But yeah, every now and again, being a little less structured, I find works really well for people in Florida. So maybe I'll only give them 1 or 2 structured rides a week, and the rest of the time is just ride and like keep it easier, endurance, moderate. And also they can do a group ride, keep it fun, because that's one of the most fun parts of riding in Florida are group rides.
Yeah.
So that's a big part of why people ride there, the social aspect.
Yeah, I was going to say it's quite a bit of the culture there, right?
Yeah, and it's fun, and you always do the same group rides. So it's not like here in Colorado where you might do, there's 20 different group rides, and you don't really get to meet people in group rides unless you go to the same one every week. Whereas in Florida, everybody knows everybody. It's like a big hangout afterwards. They all have coffee. So yeah, so it's fun, So I think a lot of the motivation for riding in Florida is the social aspect and the group ride aspect, which are like races. They'll have sprint points along the way, it'll be all out sprints, and it's kind of fun,
Yeah.
So for people in Florida who ride all year, I try to keep it like fun, with a little bit less structure at times, and also slightly less volume, I would say, overall. And that seems to work well, if you're riding all year.
Yeah. I kind of do the same thing with, I always have like this time frame in my head, and it's this kind of rolling time frame, and thinking about like, what have we done? How long have we been working on this? How do we and also when's the next race coming up? So like, just always trying to think of like, avoiding mental burnout, avoiding physical burnout, and just changing the focus, like you said. And I will say that as we get into winter and stuff here and get back on the trainer, for a lot of time, like I get excited about that, because it can be harder when people want to ride outside, and it's like, it's harder to be more focused with intervals and like different terrain and stuff like that. But it's like all of a sudden it's like, great, we're going to eliminate the variables. We can do a lot of focused work over the next 2 months and like really move the needle here. And so I think that's always an exciting time if people are still motivated. And so I think you touched on something important there where it's like, I'll have that conversation with people too. Like when we get to this point, it's like, okay, how's the motivation? Like, do you feel like going hard? Because a lot of times people are like just over it at this point. And so, but if they're like up for it and they want to do hard workouts, like, great. I love the trainer for that.
Yeah, no, the trainer is very hard and great training. Last year I raced the Tucson Bicycle Classic, and it was in February, and we had really bad weather here for like a good month before, and I hadn't been outside for like close to a month, and I had no idea how my form was going to be going into it, and I was actually quite surprised that that I actually had really good form when I started racing. But I hadn't done a crit, I hadn't done a group ride, I hadn't done anything, and now all of a sudden I'm racing we had 110 riders in our field, the 40 and the 50 plus, Cat 1, 2, 3. And from sitting on the trainer for 3 months to like now riding in a pack, racing a criterium, cornering, when you're on the trainer, you're like, it was a bit of a like rude awakening, but just for years of experience, it all came into place. But yeah, the point being that I actually ended up with really good form because I think the trainer, we also did like a Swift racing series with the team. Once a week, which was actually harder than any race I did on the road, honestly.
It's just like a time trial. It's like an hour-long time trial, right?
I mean, it's like, it does. Half the field is suspect, because, that you end up racing with them on the road and then you're like, wait a minute, like you were beating me and now I'm like putting minutes into you. What's happening? Everyone has some weird, I don't know, like setup there, and you can quite easily modify your power, I think, if you wanted to. But the point, I think, when you do a Zwift race, you can't even think about the results. You just got to use it as a workout and it is such an intense workout. And I think plus the heat training from being on the trainer, which I did quite a bit of.
I think that's a big part of it too, right? Is like you just sweat so much more. And so you just come into spring like much better able to handle the heat if you've been on the trainer a lot. I've noticed that too. I mean, just from the puddles of sweat.
Yeah. The blood volume, I feel like, is definitely increased from all the heat training. And I do quite a bit of that. Like I'll very rarely actually use a fan on the trainer when I'm training.
Oh God. Because don't do that. Nobody does that.
Well, I mean, but the basement, it's like 60 degrees. So it's not, you know what I mean? Like in the middle of winter, it's not like warm, I'll just open the window with the snowy air coming through, and I'm right next to the window. That's another thing people should focus on is like air quality. Cause I think that's like off topic, but that's a big issue I think people don't realize is how poor the air quality can be in your room with your trainer. So I've put my trainer right next to a window where I can like open the whole window.
Yeah.
Because that's, for health reasons and all that, you definitely want to have good air,
Yeah. Well, I listened to a podcast recently that you sent me, and the guy was talking about getting a CO2 tester from like Home Depot or Lowe's or something, and just like testing your CO2 in your trainer room, and that the levels are like unhealthy if you're not ventilating it properly. So that's something I'm going to go invest in because I'm super curious about it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's quite interesting, yeah. But I noticed my heart rate, like now my heart rate's 5 beats higher than it was back then, and I think it's to do with the blood volume that I had increased through the winter. Yeah. It's interesting. My heart rate's actually higher now, and I haven't done any heat training, and it hasn't been that hot here. So I think all that trainer, heat training has definitely increased my blood volume, which I think brought my heart rate a little lower.
Yeah. So now let's talk about planning for the next year. You said with your athletes that are racing that have goals, you do a review. You kind of talk about how the year happened, areas for improvement, things along those lines. What does it look like when you start to plan next year? And you had already touched on something, and this is my experience too, where it's like, you could have the best you come up with the perfect plan and like do all the annual training plan and do all these things. And 2 weeks later, something pops up, an injury, an illness, unexpected travel or something. So it rarely goes to plan. And so how do you strike that balance between planning, but not getting too into the details so that you allow that flexibility?
Yeah, I think it's quite easy to get like overly detailed when you're planning. And, I feel like you end up doing a lot of work, and then like in the reality, 3 months later, it looks completely different to like, or you don't even look at your spreadsheet that you put together.
Yeah,
You're like, wait a minute,
exactly.
like I'm actually off plan right now,
Yeah,
slightly. But no, what I like to do is, if they do have an A race or a few A races, maybe they're training for nationals. Some riders just want to race all year and be good all year. So that's a little bit of a different kind of strategy. But if you have like 1 or 2 races a year that you're targeting, I'll work backwards from there. And, I have an idea like in my head already of like how I want to, like what I want to focus on more or less in each block. And I'll kind of work backwards. And I'll also look at what there is they need to work on. And sometimes it might not be, it could be more like being able to hold an aero position. Maybe they put out great power, but they're just not aero and they're not creating much speed with their power. So maybe we need to work on some strength training, some practicing riding in that position to create more speed. It could be sprinting technique, it could be things like that they need to improve. Not necessarily like specific workouts, but more just optimizing certain areas where there's like low hanging fruit,
Right.
So then I'll work back from there all the way through, and then like I'll give each week and each block a focus. So I'll have a general outline of like how I want it to flow, and then like the actual specific workouts I might put in later, like down the road. But each block has a theme, right? So I know the theme that I want to work on in this part of the year, and then when we get there, then I'll like put in the different specific sessions that I think they need at that time. But I won't get that detailed necessarily in the beginning when I'm planning. I'm looking more at just an overall kind of flow to the year, and it's as much for me as it is for them, because I can be a better coach if I have a more of a big picture overview of the planning and the year ahead. Because sometimes we get so focused on the week, then we like forget like what's the big picture and what we're focused on, So, yeah.
Yeah. And so I agree with you 100%. And so what I started doing probably a few years ago is like I use an Excel spreadsheet. Like, so you and I both use Training Peaks, and it has an annual training plan in there, but my brain just doesn't like, because it's, like in portrait view or portrait orientation, I can't see the whole year at a time. And so I created a spreadsheet where I can see the full 52 weeks. And I love it because athlete, like it disappears so quick. 52 weeks goes away really quickly. And so I'll give it to the athletes. It's like, okay, put in all your vacation days, put in any travel that you're aware of, pick your 2 to 3 A races. And it's like pretty soon the year's gone. And so it's just a good exercise to wrap your head around how short a season actually is, right? And especially if you've got travel going on and stuff like that. And then it allows me, like you said, to go in and I just identify what those blocks look like, where it's like, okay, here I want to be working on this, here I want to be working on this, but it's not really getting into the details. Do you use anything to set up your season plan, or what does that look like?
Yeah, I do something similar to that. I'll use like Google Docs, same thing basically. So I do something similar, but sometimes I'll sit down in person with them and like kind of fill it out a little bit together, or I'll show them what I put together and ask them for their input. But I like your idea where you also tell them to add everything in there. Maybe I'll use that in the future. I like that idea. But yeah, I agree. I've tried to use the annual training plan on Training Peaks a few times, but it never really, I was never able to use it like long term, and it just didn't really work for me. I have a few like ideas in my head, also like ramp rate by week. So like, like more or less like depending on the hours they train and the level of athlete, I'll have an idea of like how much I want to ramp the week TSS roughly. And then, I'll look at those kind of things while I'm, week to week and just also determine how much we can improve. So like if we've scheduled a recovery week, but they really didn't have a good week the week before, everything is going to change, right? In the plan potentially. Maybe now we postpone the recovery week for another week or two, or
right.
So yeah, so I like to also look at the progression and the ramp rate and just over time and see how they're recovering and just use that more than the annual training plan from Training Peaks.
Yeah, I'm sure you get this question all the time from athletes too, where it's like they want to know, how am I doing, or am I improved, things like that. And it's like, for me, it's like, okay, the very basic thing, it's like, how many green workouts do you have? How many red workouts do you have? Are we on track or aren't we? Right. And then, like, before we even like get into the TSS and the ramp rates and stuff like that, it's like just that, like, what do your weeks look like? And it goes back to that consistency.
Yeah. No, I agree.
And so when you're setting up, I think this is something important to touch on too, where you again, you've been coaching longer than I have. And so, when I first started coaching, like, there was this very rigid idea of like periodization, and it's like, oh, you do your base period for this, and then you do this, and then you do this. But it like, for most athletes, it's not very practical. One, because they don't have all the hours in the world to train. And two, because they're doing lots of races over the course of the season. And so you had just mentioned something where I think you'd said something like a racing block or something like that. And so how might you set up like, for me, I'll tell athletes, if they're doing big races like Unbound and Leadville, then we might choose our 2 to 3 big races, our A races, and use those as kind of the anchors of the season. Definitely register for those, but then leave the rest of it a little bit more flexible, where they can add other races depending on how they're feeling at that time in the year and stuff like that. Versus if I'm coaching somebody for like XCO, they have a racing period where it's like they're racing every weekend or every other weekend for 6 to 8 weeks, right? And so it's like really like getting them fit for that, and that becomes like their race period. So how do you handle that?
Yeah, it is challenging sometimes. Also, when athletes, train a race a lot, like week in, week out, then it's oftentimes, especially at a high level, you have to prioritize really recovery at that point,
right,
and being fresh for the racing, but also enough stimulus so that they're not detraining either and losing form throughout the race block. So it's a bit of a juggling act there, and each rider is a little different. If we're working towards a season and then they have a race block, I'm more inclined to use more of like a pyramidal type, progressive, like, increase in intensity, building up from the lower zones through the higher zones, going, kind of traditional, but not polarized, more like pyramidal in a sense, with a bit more like tempo, zone 3, going into threshold, then like a race, like specific race practice block or specific block where they're doing sessions that are going to prime them for racing. That doesn't have to be very long, they could be like 10 days. Like too much of that, I think, burns people out, right? So sometimes if you just switch to the high intensity just for a week or two, that can be enough before you start your first race, because the first races can then help you, fine tune the form. And once they're in race, if they're racing every week, then it's going to look like more, I guess, like a polarized approach, right? At that point, because at that point you're going to do, I still like to try keep the volume up, but like low intensity volume during the race season. I feel like that's quite important, and I think that helps people feel better. I think if they taper too much for races, I see that a lot where, they feel really flat. A lot of athletes, if they're too tapered. Also, sometimes if they're going to be racing a lot, I'm going to probably give them sessions that are not super mentally challenging. If they have one hard session a week in the race block, they're probably better off doing something like 40-20s, 30-30s versus like 5-minute VO2 max intervals, right? Because like if you're doing 4 or 5 minute VO2 max intervals, that takes a lot more energy than like, say you do like 40-20s or So I also take that into consideration, because I also want them mentally fresh to push on race day. The training is not as important as how they are on race day,
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point too, where it's like a lot of times, and I want to go back to this because you talked about durability too, so I want to touch on that, where it's like a lot of times the reason we're prescribing workouts, it's not so much about fitness as it is about like the mental side of it, like building confidence, letting somebody knocking out a workout. And it's like one of the worst things you can do is give them a workout that they fail going into an important race or something, and it gets in their head and they're like, oh, I'm not strong. And so it's like you want to set them up for success, let them experience and that success and have confidence with it. And so you had talked a little bit about, so you're doing a season review with an athlete and it comes to light that maybe durability or efforts later in a race is what actually matters. And it's interesting because I think, going back again, like every athlete wants to know, how am I doing? And everybody wants their FTP to go up and they want peak power numbers all the time. But it's like a lot of times it's not what you're doing fresh that matters. It's what you're doing at the end of a 4 or 5 hour race, which is a little bit harder to quantify. And so with that in mind, I'm curious how you address it. But like when I'm writing workouts, a lot of times, depending on what I'm going for, if I want peak power, then I want them fresh and I want them doing it at the beginning of the workout. But if it's more about like mental familiarity and just getting used to putting out that power at the end of a long ride, then I'm less, so I'll like schedule the intervals at the end of the session or at the end of a long ride. And it's like, I really don't care what the power is. It's like more just about like doing it so you can, like, it sucks kind of thing,
Yeah, no, sure. Yeah, I agree also with what you said earlier about, like I'll be quite mindful of the session that I give them before a race, that it's going to help their confidence or not like destroy their confidence. And maybe I'll keep the power a little lower even then, so I know they can easily achieve it, because that is a big factor. You don't want them to like bomb a workout like 3 days out from a race,
Yeah.
But yeah, in terms of what like durability or training, I agree. And if you're looking for like high power, big power, then I'll do that, more towards like in a shorter ride or earlier when they're fresher. If we're doing like just a big day, like high kilojoules race simulation, then it'll be, a variety of different efforts, and it'll be more about, wouldn't be such high power, but it'll be more about just accumulating a lot of time at that kind of like high power, change of pace, intensity, like a race. Because the biggest difference between racing and training often is, all the spikes, all the accelerations. When you look at a file, you always see a lot of zone 6. Like if you look at, zone 5, 6, whereas in training, it's very hard to get there, right? But all that time often is just like 10, 15 second surges throughout the race, And if you haven't done any of that and you're going to race, that's, your body is going to be like, that's when you see also guys cramping and all that, because they're not used to all the surges. And so then I might schedule, like you were saying, like less focus on power and just more accumulation of a lot of varied efforts throughout a longer, harder ride, to kind of get their body ready for just, doing efforts when they're quite fatigued. So yeah, that's something similar to what I do.
Yeah. And I think another important point with that too is a lot of times in racing, bar like Ironman or time trials, a lot of times the pace is dictated to you. You don't get to choose when you go hard and when you're feeling good, you can't like wait until it's like, oh yeah, this is the perfect hill to like put in this effort, or I'm feeling good. And so that it's like, you have to do it or you get dropped. And so I think that's the other part of like that kitchen sink workouts or whatever we're going to call them, the variability. It's like, it's just to like get out there and like just do a variety of efforts on legs that may not be great, or like you may not feel like doing it. And that's the importance of the group rides in that too.
Definitely. Yeah. Group rides are really great, depending on if you have good group rides in your area. Like we have one here in Boulder. It's harder than any race I do all year. I did it. It's called Turned Up Tuesday. It's it's a lunchtime. It's a lunchtime ride. I did it yesterday. I mean, a bunch of ex-pros, like a lot of like top riders there. And I mean, we average, 30 plus 30 miles an hour for like, we're just through and off, like, until you can't go anymore. I mean, the roads are flatter, but it's very hard. But if I just do that session, that ride, like, a couple of times, then any race I do doesn't even feel anywhere near as hard,
Right.
And it's perfect race simulation, because it is a race actually, there's sprint points and everything. So so I think it's hard to do that on your own, in training.
Yeah, and you talked about racing Zwift, And I think that's the other, like, you also can't get that from Zwift. Yes, you can get hard efforts, but it's not going to be anywhere near of like sitting in the draft and like having to answer attacks and having to sprint. And like, yes, they're trying to replicate that, but it's just nowhere near the same as being out on the road doing it.
No, Zwift is more like just like it's more of a steadier kind of hard grind all the time, right? Like threshold and higher, like a lot of the times, or slightly below threshold. It's that quick acceleration, deacceleration, freewheeling, that's something you don't experience in a Zwift race, which in regular racing, often you're freewheeling, you just, those little surges all the time.
Yeah, sitting in and conserving energy. Right. You can't sit in on Zwift.
No. Yeah, totally.
So last thing here, what does it, you talked about goal setting with your athletes and coming up with some goals for the next season and stuff like that. And so what does that look like for you?
Yeah, it's, I mean, I know, some people use those SMART goals and all that. Like for me, it'll be more just like, figuring out, it could be a specific goal, like a result, but also I want to also just understand how somebody wants to like show up, in a race, like what do they want to, and focus a little bit maybe more on the process as well, because often if you show up with the right mindset and you show up, with the right energy and you focused on the right things in the race, the result happens on its own.
Right.
But if you're just fixated on a result, often that leads to a lot of disappointment. So I like to, result is not the main focus always. It could be, how do you want to show up? How do you want to be on the day? Also, what do you want to do if things go wrong, right? Because like someone they want to get their PR in the race, but then, they have a flat tire and now all of a sudden like they're quitting the race because now everything's gone out the window, right?
Right.
But I want to have maybe a plan for that as well. Okay, so if you do crash and you can still race, or if you do flat, okay, what are we going to shift to? What's the goal then? Like the goal then is maybe you want to be mentally focused. You want to keep pushing until the end, even if you're like last place. You want to like make it your best effort for the day. Be proud of your effort. So there might be more than one goal for that event, because I think when people hyperfixate on just the result, oftentimes they leave that feeling a little empty.
Yeah.
Because there's so many variables for one. And even if you do achieve that result, like sometimes you actually still feel empty, because it's like, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with you 1,000% on the outcome goals. Like I think outcome goals are good, and they're good to have, like being on a podium, winning, getting a PR, things like that. But a lot of it is also outside your control. And this is a conversation I've had with athletes a lot of times, where it's like, so let's say their goal is to set a PR or to get a podium, both those things, right? And it's like, so they go and they take 10, 20 minutes off their last year's time, but faster people showed up. And so it wasn't good enough to get on the podium. It's like, yeah, so you did a time that would have got you second this year or first this year. But unfortunately, it wasn't good enough. And so it's like, so was this a success? Yeah, because you're right. It's like they're still disappointed, but it was also a success in that you took 20 minutes off your time from last year. And so it's important to have those outcome goals. And then, like you said, the ones that are in your control, those process goals. So things that you can do, like taking care of your bike, making sure that you like don't give up when it gets hard, or, when that voice is in your head telling you to quit, you push through, like things like that are in your control lead to that outcome goal.
Yeah. When I started racing, and in my early years, I was very like, outcome focused and ego kind of like, driven by trying to win, and, and that was great. I mean, that's where most young athletes are in the World Tour, and that did get me some good results, and but I also remember feeling like quite empty, like at times, even when I did get a good result, because it's just like you just focused on like getting something, and then you get it, and then okay, now what, but then like later on in life, like once I took a break from racing for like 10, 15 years, and then I came back to the sport, I changed quite a lot of my outlook. And, this year and previous years, the last couple of years have been fun racing here. I race with, a really good masters team Curie, Test Lab. We have a bunch of national champion top riders. And for me now, when I go to a race, it's more about just like the experience of it. And like, if I don't do well, I'm not losing sleep over it, honestly. Like I'm very like unattached, honestly, but I'm also going for it, like, and I'm having fun, and I'm also helping my teammates when I can win. And we've won a lot of races. I've won 6 races this year, and it's been with a completely different energy and mindset compared to when I was like 18 or 20. And it's been a lot more fulfilling because I'm not attached to the outcome. I'm more about like, what is the energy that I'm bringing, And like, I want to be proud of my own efforts. Like at the end, that's the main thing. I don't want to have any regrets, but regrets are more like how I show up and the effort I give, not like the result as much. But the results come like automatically because I'm like just focused on being my best version, and that's what's important to me.
Yeah.
And doing my best, but also in a playful way, like in a fun way, where there's no pressure, because no one really cares about masters racing. Actually, it really doesn't matter, honestly. Like if you win a race, you know what I mean. So I don't take myself too seriously either.
Yeah.
Which I think helps, So I think, but it makes racing so much more fun when you just more playful, like a kid. You're not evaluating your sense of self-worth as a cyclist after each race.
Right.
You're just there more like a kid playing and trying to be your best, but also okay for the bad days, because that's part of the journey. You got to embrace that as well, because cycling is a brutal sport, and especially at the higher levels. I mean, those riders deal with a lot of disappointment. Most races end in disappointment for a higher level athlete, right?
Right.
And that's, as a coach, as you know, that's a lot of what we do is to help people get through those tough disappointments.
Yeah.
So I think if you can help people who are not pro or want to be pro, but who are just doing it for fun, like I am, if you can help them bring the good energy to the race and focus on the right things that are going to make them feel like fulfilled and accomplished and satisfied. And a lot of that is just changing perspective, like what's the story you're telling yourself about the race, like about yourself, about the race. If you can help them change their perspective, I think you can help them just have a lot more of a meaningful experience, just competing. And they don't have to be winning or achieving their goal necessarily. But it's more about just helping them see like where they are achieving success and personal success,
Yeah. I think you just said something really important too, is I think one of the biggest things when you talk about regrets is finishing a race feeling like you could have done more, like you could have given more. And so it's like, yeah, as long as you can honestly say that you did your best on that day, whatever it happens to be. Sometimes your best is enough. Most of the time it's not, right? Like you just said, like I think I heard a stat or read a stat that was like in the pro peloton, like 3% have been on a podium, like 2% have like won a race, right? So the rest of the field has like never been on a podium at the pro tour level, right? And so, yeah, it's like most days you're not going to win. And so it's like, but I think those days you don't win, there's a lot more to, and whatever winning means in that moment, right? But I think there's more to be gained and learned from that than the days you do win. And so that I think is really important. I think another thing with the goal setting with athletes, you had mentioned, how do you want to show up? And I think that was something early on when I coached, like I went into it thinking that everybody wants to be on a podium. Everybody wants to be faster. Everybody wants to be this. And it's like, no, a lot of times athletes' goals are all different. Some of them just want to I want to finish the race feeling good. I don't want to feel spent afterwards, like that. And so I think having that conversation with the athlete too is like, what does success look like to you? And then revisiting that over the course of the year, like we talked about setting up that perfect annual plan and all this stuff and then never going back to it. But it's amazing to me how many times I go back and look at what the goals were and I forgot about that. No, I'm not even thinking about that anymore. And so it's like checking in with the athlete. Is this still your goal? Are we still on course? Because like in order to help you get there, we both need to be on the same page.
Yeah, I've had that experience too as well. I know exactly. Yeah, it's true. When you win, I've been a racer. I've always focused on winning, but I have plenty of clients who for them, it's more about like the training journey. They just want to enjoy training, have routine, have accountability. They'll race here and there, but that's not their main focus. And so we have to really understand what the person's about and why they're doing it, and not just project what we think, you should be if you're a racer, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah, totally.
Awesome. So any, before I let you go, any parting advice for athletes who are starting to come into this kind of in-between season?
I think it's maybe a good time just to allow yourself some time off or unstructured time, and just maybe spend a bit of time writing down like what was good about this year. What were the highlights? Because that's important as well. Just to think about all our little successes we've had throughout the year.
Yes.
You got to also give that some attention and pat yourself on the back for the good times and the challenges, getting through those and all that. And then think about how you want next year to look like. Something I've done for myself and for many of my clients, I'll tell them to actually project themselves a year in advance. So say, today's date, but in a year from now, and write a short paragraph like we're doing our season review, but in a year from now, but write it like it's already happened.
I love that.
And describe to me, like, what does the year look like? But don't focus on necessarily the results, but focus on the feeling and emotion of what are the things, the highlights that you experienced or achieved. Focusing mostly on that, the feeling, the emotion, how you want to feel. But think about it like it's happened,
Right.
like it's in the past, and date it in the future and write it like it's looking back. And that is actually a very powerful technique. And that's something I'll also do for myself. If I'm like, sometimes I've done it for races or other things in life that are coming up. And it's actually amazing how things fall into place like that. And it's really the energy you feel while you're writing it that's really powerful. So that's one tip I would suggest people do. Like, that could also be just for life in general, right? It doesn't have to be around cycling.
Yeah.
But the fact writing it in the past, like it's happened, that's the magic plus the emotion and the feeling. And when you're doing it, really being present with it, and then you'll see it's pretty cool. Yeah. So that's one tip. And then, it's, I guess if you're coached by somebody, just, be honest and open and really, it's don't do what you think they want you to be, but rather just be yourself and be true and honest, and come up with a plan together, because we want the best for every athlete we coach, and we don't know what you're thinking sometimes, or a lot of the time. So, we want to help you on the journey. It's really a team effort in the end of the day, a collaboration,
Yeah, I love it. So where can people find you?
Coaching, simonsaycycling.com is my website. Also, Simon Says Cycling at Gmail. Also on Instagram, Simon Says Cycling, and Facebook. So that's where you can find me.
Fantastic. Well, I love it. I really enjoyed talking to you, and I think people get a lot out of this. So thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. Take care.
Cheers.